Ladies and gents, welcome back. It's been a weekly tradition for the past little while. I bring in a special guest, Marty up north, to talk about things that have been going on. Now, he's been gone for about a week on a big nature hike, and he has no idea what has happened in Canada over the past week. So let's bring him in. Marty, how are you doing? You seem to be
Clyde, I had to. I told
in
you last
ignorance
week. I said I
bliss.
didn't think I'd. Yeah, I told you last week I didn't think I'd make it. I made it. I was in a campsite, a backcountry campsite this morning, and I left at 8 o'clock. I ended up at Maligne Lake at 10. I had to hitchhike twice. Each time was about a 50-kilometer hitchhike, and then jump in my car and drive here. I got home about 2 hours ago. So I have, and you and I had a brief conversation or chat on text. I said, instead of talking about current events, why don't you tell me what happened during the 7 days, and I'll give you my reaction and perhaps some commentary. Let's try something different, because I honestly have no idea what happened.
So much has happened. Now, first off, before we got into this, I said, why don't we just talk about this while we're recording here? Because you were talking about your hike and how much sequestered carbon is on, and this is getting into the first story. Now, tell me about that. You had a hard time because you're walking over dead trees.
Yeah, I was hiking part of the Continental Divide, and it's an old trail called the Maligne Pass. It's a trail sort of that leads to Maligne Lake, and it's been decommissioned by Parks Canada about 20 years ago. So decommissioned in their language just means they no longer maintain it, which discourages people from going in there. And their reason for no longer maintaining it is it's prime grizzly habitat and caribou habitat. So they're trying to keep humans out. And so me and my partner, when we were walking, once the trail is no longer maintained, trees are falling everywhere. And now they become problematic to go over. But once in a while you come across a tree that has cut marks. You can see where a chainsaw cut it, and it looks, to me like it's been 20 or 30 years old. So a tree that's fallen, even 20 or 30 years later, still across the trail, and it's still a problem. And when I'm walking there as a scientist, I often think about what you just mentioned. Look at all this carbon sequestration, which means all this carbon is trapped, whether it's in a tree that's dead or alive. Our Canadian Rockies are an amazing sink for carbon. There's so much carbon stored there, and so much carbon being stored, because one of the things that happened, and some people will say climate change, because I was able to go over this pass. Maligne Pass is at about 2,200 meters, and I was able to go over it in June. And some years I can't go over it until, say, July or August even. And people go, oh, climate change. Like, no, I've been doing this for 35 years. So some years it's June, some years it's July. Like the cycle around the sun is not so precise that on July 1st every year the temperature is the same. And there's so many factors. So,
well, yeah, and that kind of segues into what was going on this week. So, as you know, the forest fires around Canada, and there's been a lot that lit up in Eastern Canada, of course, in British Columbia, in Alberta, all over Canada, and it's been smoking out the United States. There was a New York Post headline saying "Blame Canada" as New York was filled with smoke. It was really bad, actually. It was really bad, but they had a public health warning. Now, of course, immediately the politicians all do their climate change. We need more carbon taxes, because carbon taxes will stop this somehow. Taxing the public will cause them to cause nature to retreat. I don't understand the logic behind it. I understand the cash grab. But yeah. The thing that I brought up, because a lot of people were talking about, there's arson. Obviously, there was a lot of cases of arson. A lot of people speculating that it was environmental, terrorism, eco-terrorism to scare people in this right. But I brought up an interesting point. It was a talk that was given, a TED talk that was given by Paul F. Hesburgh. He's a forestries guy, and he came forward with this concept of, it's actually our management and what we've been doing that's causing the problem here. And we actually have too much of a load on our forests, and it has largely to do with two things. We've been taking the big trees out of the forests and letting the small trees grow up and grow too densely. And we're not allowing for the natural fire cycle, which is a natural occurrence in the forests throughout North America and the world. And if you don't do that, then you get too much of a fuel load over time. And when the forest fires do rage, they'll rage hotter and worse, and you'll have drier soil and all of this stuff. Of course you get in the comments and you have to end up defending yourself in it, but
no. And in fact, when I'm walking on the trail, many times I turn the camera on myself and I'll make a comment because I document my hikes and what I'm seeing, but I also document thoughts. And I've talked about that on the trail many times, that even in a national park there should be some harvesting. Maybe they'd have to harvest with an old-fashioned technology. I don't know, send crews with horses, but I still think that's ridiculous. They need to harvest. And I get negative comments for making that from my community of hikers that are environmentalists. And like we've said in an episode before, I get called a hypocrite in those days, but I'm not trying to be a hypocrite. Neither are you. We want to talk about these things, and there's things that we can't talk about anymore. Yeah, maybe the forests are too big and some cutting is important. I know it's important, and plus, think of the benefit. I mean, it's also renewable resource, which is also funny because we get told find renewable resources. Well, then that kind of means that we're going back to cutting trees, because trees are one of the best renewable resources instead of making everything out of concrete. But
well, what Paul was saying in his speech was not just the harvesting. Harvesting is obviously a good method, but also burning. So lots of controlled burns, but doing it in the fall time when you're a little bit it's you're capable of putting them out if they go crazy in the fall, and allow for the ashes and everything that would come to rejuvenate and be part of the soil.
Did he talk about the forest as having sort of the overall forest being a creature, an entity that has a life cycle?
I'm sure he talks about that, and he talks about how when we first settled here and we came, this forests were actually much more sparsely separated, and there was grassy areas and there was forested areas, and there was the natural fire cycle would actually cause these, and it's actually our behavior that caused all of this. And about 100 years ago or so, there was a giant fire in I think it was like the Oregon or Washington area, and it killed a bunch of people that were fighting it. So then they went with the zero fires strategy, and now we're 100 years later, we have all this fuel load, and we're trying to deal with the fires that are happening right now. And
I'll have to look for that. That sounds fascinating, and actually an interesting point you mentioned. Yes, when I'm walking through the forest of the national park, let's say Jasper, even though you'd think that Jasper would all be one similar forest, it's not. It's actually quite remarkable when you are in the ground and you're 30 kilometers from, say, a road. All of a sudden you go, wow, this is interesting. All the trees are giant, and then on the ground there's nothing. Then sometimes you'll get in another section of the forest that is just like chopsticks all stacked together. So that's interesting. So it's either a different stage of the forest, or it got that way because of a different event. Yeah, interesting. Very cool. Yeah.
Without a better segue, let's just move on
burn, baby, burn.
There you go. Burn, baby, burn is a good segue into the Bank of Canada and what's been going on. So I made a prediction ahead of time, and that was that the interest rates would go up. Right. Many people, especially real estate agents, saying no, they'll probably go down or stay the same. Of course, they have a vested interest in making that happen, or at least telling people that. Of course, they did go up, and they went up by 2.5 points. So another 0.25 percentage. So wow. It's 4.75. So
is it in the 5% range now? It'd be 4.75.
Yeah, 4.75. Wow. And it looks like they may have to keep going with interest rates, because we're trying to stave off inflation. In fact, the Bank of Canada was even saying, or there was an article, I think it was by the National Post, that was talking about it, saying the Bank of Canada is doing their best to stave off inflation with higher interest rates, at the same time as the Trudeau government is reaching in that wallet and pulling out more money that we don't have. And it's really like a tug of war between the Bank of Canada and the budget that passed. The Conservatives, while you were away, tried to stop it from passing, but it passed anyway.
The budget passed?
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't. So the budget passed. Well, I guess I mean the budget passed with the Liberals and the NDP. But back to the interest rate. So, yeah, it's too bad we're here. I think that, our country could have been better. The fiscal management of this country could have been better through COVID and afterwards, but it is what it is, let's say. And now we have to try and curb this inflation. What is the recipe book for curbing inflation? I mean, everybody talks about increasing interest rates, but do you do it gradually, or do you sort of like punch it in hard? Because the bank, obviously, in our case, is doing it. Are they doing it gradually while observing, or do they just have a plan that they haven't told us and they've set an interest rate of, I don't know, like have they decided behind the scene that 7% is the interest rate they're trying to get to and they're going to get? Do you have a sense of that?
So I know market fundamentals, and I'm more of a laissez-faire type, like free market capitalist. I hope that the market decides the way the functions of the market are going to function. Of course, interest rates are a function of monetary supply, and that's and not only that, it's a function of liquidity in the marketplace. So if people have savings that they can that are liquid savings that they can lend out, then the market would dictate this based on time preferences. The whole equation is essentially time preference, and you have your demand and supply curve, which would be the demand is everybody wants to borrow money for whatever capital investment, and then the supply would be savings available, and that's the equation for setting the price mechanism for interest rates. That's a market fundamental. Now we're working with a central bank phenomena sort of environment, and it's arbitrary. It really is arbitrary because the Bank of Canada is setting the rates. Now the Bank of Canada is setting the rates, trying to judge that based on their knowledge of, if they put more liquidity into the marketplace, it will, it'll foster more economic growth because people will borrow money to do things with it. But it's inflationary, right? So to stave off that, you need to get more savings in the marketplace in order for interest rates to come down. So higher interest rates initially would actually get people to save. And that's the paradigm that they're going.
That's the paradigm, and then I guess there's an unfortunate thing in our country is that inflation started when we had interest rates at 1%, and so even the minuscule interest rate increases have a big impact. I mean, if interest rates had been, say, 6 or 7% for the last decade, and the government needed to curb inflation, I guess, would they still do a quarter point increase, or would they be doing 1% increases? I mean, I know my mom
talked to... we're slowly peeling a Band-Aid off. Like it should be like the 1980s. And as much as this would hurt a lot of people, it's been too low for too long, and really high interest rates would shock the market. It would really damage a lot of people's portfolios and their position, especially in the housing market. But essentially, ripping that Band-Aid off is what brought inflation down in the 1980s, and it's the only thing that'll work.
It is, but even in the 1980s, when you look in the 1980s, they had gone, for years at 5%, and they went to 20%. So let's say, 5 to 20 is a fourfold. My God, we're at 1%. So as soon as we're already at that fourfold increase, if we go to 5 or 6, we are talking a huge delta from where they were, a year ago. So I'm very scared of that. And luckily I'm late in life. And so my mortgage is not one of my concerns. It's a concern for my children. Mm-hmm. The buddy I went hiking with, it's a giant concern. He mentioned it. It's something that I know. The average mortgage is 3-year term. So so about 30% of the people renewed in 2022. 30% are going to renew in 2022, and then the ones that have to renew in 2023 are in trouble. And so my buddy has to renew, I think he said in October or November this year, and he's scared shitless. He's scared shitless because, his $2,000 a month mortgage payments are going to go, in his mind, they're going to go up 40%. I'm like, yeah, they are.
That's actually the statistics from the Bank of Canada. That was what was released, is that the average, when reset in the next between now and 3 years from now, all the mortgages
so $1,500 so $1,500 a month more times 12 months. I'm doing the math. That's $17,500. He'd have to go to his boss and ask for whatever 10% raise. His boss ain't going to give him a 10% raise, so it's going to have to come from somewhere. Wow. Yeah, well, it's pain. It's going to be pain.
It's going to be pain.
And that's what happens. So if my buddy can't renew his mortgage, then he'll have to sell his house. And when enough people are in that same situation and get desperate, they will offload their houses. Now, houses, of all the things that families give up in times of crisis, the house is the last thing to go. You'll give up your car. You'll start taking the train. You'll give up your trips. You'll start eating less. You'll hang on to your house as long as possible. So it'll be interesting. Any prediction on how high the interest rate will go in Canada by the end of this year?
By the end of this year, I'm not sure. I don't know if they'll make the move to jump higher or if they'll just maintain this steady incline. And I think it's probably going to do this steady incline. I don't think they have the wherewithal to do the Band-Aid rip, like a Paul Volcker or a Alan Greenspan type 20%, 19% prime rate. I don't see that happening. I just really don't. But nonetheless, I think a lot of people are going to be hurt when this happens, and I think politically this is going to really affect the Liberals and the NDP as they stand in their coalition.
Just made me think of a weird segue, and it's not a segue, but it's. Can you see the price I paid for a sandwich? Is it out of focus?
Is that $16 for an egg salad sandwich?
$15.95 for an egg salad sandwich. On my way home in one of the little stops inside Jasper National Park.
That's outrageous. You gotta be kidding me.
I'm sure the price is going to go up because now there's another evacuation going on and they're forcing people down south through the park again. But anyways, it was a weird. Let's hope we don't get $16 groceries. If I walked into Saskatchewan Crossing where I got that sandwich and I had to spend $100, I would get the sandwich. A box of Kraft Dinner was $5.99. A bag of chips was $6. Felt like I was in the Arctic.
That's incredible.
And that's what we're heading towards, folks. I'm sorry, but that's what the carbon tax and all these other things are going to do to us Canadians, man. You think the $500 you're getting from Trudeau is something? It ain't that. That's
well, and the carbon tax is an insidious one. It's not like the GST where it gets deducted at every stop, right? So every business that pays GST gets a rebate for the GST they pay. It gets passed on to the consumer in that way. The carbon tax gets compounded every time it passes hands and goes to the next person. That carbon tax is repaid and repaid and repaid and added to. There's a big snowball effect on the prices. It's going to be outrageous, especially with these new personal carbon taxes that they're adding.
Absolutely, and I'll say another thing: the fact that we are living through a period of high inflation and other things is noticeable. I mean, when I was in the backcountry visiting Banff and places like that, it is noticeable. There's almost no traffic compared to what there used to be. And the kids are just getting out of school, so it'll pick up. But to me, it's noticeable. People are staying home. It's too expensive. It's, here in Alberta, we're starting to see $1.50, $1.60 for gas again. We're not used to that. And that's too much.
Well, speaking of people going on vacations, one guy in Ottawa has gone on a permanent vacation, or he's signed up for a permanent vacation. And that would be the special rapporteur, David Johnston. He stepped down.
He did?
He did. He
stepped down.
Gave his formal letter of resignation saying that he's...
Okay, well, that's the good news. Okay, that's a good news. He gave it... So... He still got paid. That's fine. You know what? He got paid. He stepped down. Okay, on with it. Is he being replaced with another rapporteur, or are they going to do an inquiry? What did they decide?
So he's still maintaining his recommendation for a private inquiry, but that somebody else be decided for his position. And he recommended that they consult with the Conservatives, the official opposition, in the choice of who should be that person. Now, the funny part of this whole story is immediately after the news dropped that he was stepping down, we got also news of a special surprise visit to Ukraine from Justin Trudeau. He took off. He bailed the country immediately on the news that his special rapporteur ski buddy and cottage neighbor has had stepped down.
Okay, so there's a little bit to unpack there. So Mr. Johnston is just done. That's fine. And how is that perceived? Like he just was it perceived as a victory by anybody, by the Conservatives, or did it just, how was it perceived?
So it was largely perceived as David Johnston making a last-ditch effort to possibly save his reputation that he built through his whole life, and it was kind of a little too late, because he was still maintaining his recommendations. He was still doing all the things in his formal capacity. He had already filed a report that he had come up with before even interviewing the people that were the subjects of the report, i.e. Aaron O'Toole, and that.
You know what? I'm going to take it as a victory, though. I'm going to take it as a victory, and it is a victory, even though it'll have cost us $270,000 or whatever. Be interesting to see if there is some partisanship is put aside and somebody else gets. If this happens again, something similar, maybe we'll figure out. Where's there has to be a better pool of public servants that can be picked from to do these kinds of roles. Yeah. And I agree. Like if they're going to appoint somebody like that, then form a small committee, and the small committee can appoint somebody like that. They could have saved so many headaches if they had done this properly. But we don't expect anything to be done properly from the Trudeau government. I mean, they haven't done anything right. So we'll take it as a victory.
And especially Trudeau today coming out and interviewed, asked about it. And he said, he's hoping to work with the Conservatives, but their partisan behavior has made it so difficult for him to... I know, you can't make it up, man.
And now tell me, so now Trudeau went to Ukraine?
Yeah, he went to Ukraine with a gift of $500 million more of our tax money.
Right,
yeah.
Because he was in Ukraine a while ago. I remember he was there about 6 months ago. Remember that flag-raising comedy routine where they tried to reopen the Canadian embassy in Kiev? So, did he have anything symbolic to do, or what did he do? He just showed up and met with Zelensky somewhere and gave him a check?
Well, there was an embarrassing moment where he met with some official from Ukraine who is actually a disgraced official. Apparently, he had been too closely tied with a Barista group, a Barandista group, a group of people tied with, the funny mustache clankety clank group from the World War II. And he met with someone who's a professed Holocaust denier and open.
So when he meets with people of ill repute, it's okay. When Pierre Poilievre accidentally sits down with somebody that Trudeau disagrees with, well, that's a big deal.
Yeah, essentially.
So what's the media making of Trudeau visiting there? Are they
whitewash? Not much.
And who did he take with him? Let me guess. Did he take Jolie with him, or did he take Freeland with him? I'm going to say he took Jolie with him.
I'm going to say I don't know. I'm going to say I looked at the situation.
Jolie's a foreign affairs minister, so that's who he should be taking on a trip, and that's the new mistress.
Well, there is some news from today about Chrystia Freeland, though, and this is an interesting one. This is a tweet from Bob Picard. I believe he is. I'm not sure exactly who he is, and I'm doing research for this for tomorrow's story. But apparently, he tendered his resignation as a global comms chief of the AIIB, and that AIIB is the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank.
Okay.
And he cited that it's as a patriotic Canadian, this was my only course. The bank is dominated by Communist Party members and also one of the most toxic cultures imaginable. I don't believe my country's interests are served by its AIIB membership. Now, something to be noted on that is Miss Chrystia Freeland, Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, is a governor of that organization. And so is Mr. Rob Stewart, Deputy Minister of International Trade.
God, there are so many cushy appointments and patronage appointments in this country, right? I mean, we have ambassadors and deputy ambassadors and directors and representatives to all these organizations. So this is probably a gentleman who profited from his role for a decade, and suddenly now
he's grown a conscience.
He's got a conscience. Yeah, no. And so are we seeing a lot of conscience appear right now, or is it rats jumping off the ship at various levels,
Well, yeah, there's definitely the rats on the ship.
Okay, so this one makes sense on its own, but now I thought you're going to tell me that Freeland was thinking of jumping in that role, because we've often suspected that she is the deputy prime minister, so in theory she's being groomed to replace Trudeau, but we've also heard so many other stories that she's contemplating jumping completely and going to the economic forum or to NATO or something like that. So this was not her jumping.
She is already a board of trustees member of the World Economic Forum, which a lot of people cite as a conflict of interest, and I would tend to agree with that. How can you be a board of trustees of a lobby group for the government when you're a member of the government? That just the conflict, it's not even an appearance of conflict of interest, but I guess in Trudeau's government there is no such thing as a conflict of interest as long as it's their interest. It's
absolutely not. I mean, yeah, we've talked about this before, like even in the private sector. I've had senior roles and as a senior role in the private sector, my conflict of interest, they would ask me, I work for an oil company. So they would say, do you own shares in another oil company? And some companies would say I couldn't. Others would say, sure, you can, but they have to be declared. They'd even ask if my wife had shares or was an officer in another company. So in the private sector, we take conflict of interest very seriously, and what's ironic is it's the government that puts the rules on us. It's the government that comes up with rules like Sarbanes-Oxley and whatnot. So the government forces the private sector to be transparent and arm's length about everything, but then they don't put any similar rules to themselves, apparently.
No, it's infuriating.
I've said it before. I want to. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in some of these government meetings, and I'm wondering, is the only way to do it ever to be elected? Like I'm gonna run for politics just so that once a week I can come on your show and say, Clyde, guess what I learned this week? Like it's hilarious, because
the most interesting thing I find about Chrystia Freeland, I mean, despite how evil she seems to be all the time, she was actually a reporter. She was a journalist in her previous lifetime, and in that capacity, she actually railed against these multinational businessmen, these corporations, these organizations. She wrote a book called Plutocrats. Yep. And it was specifically railing against that. I wonder how close she got to it before she got an invite to the table.
Well, remember, I've often shared this teeny wee little clip, but there's a clip of her and Trudeau being interviewed by I can't remember who it was, but she talked about that. She, in the interview with Trudeau sitting next to her, she's talking about how in Canada, the job you get nowadays is more dependent on what your father did than on what you do. And she was trying to make a point, but as she makes the point, you look at Trudeau, go, yeah, the job you get is dependent on the job your father got. Like truly, and I don't think she would.
She didn't realize
I'm rambling a little bit,
she was ranting about nepotism in front of the nepotistic.
And she's against nepotism. She's weird because she's kind of a socialist Marxist in a sense, but she also has this other, perhaps real capitalist side to her. And now she's stuck in trying to make, I don't think she's guided by anything very she doesn't have a moral compass guiding her right now. She's stuck in the Trudeau liberal machine, and she's not who she used to be. That's my perception of her now. And I know a lot of people have said if she got elected and replaced Trudeau as the leader, that she'd be worse. I think I'd be okay with her, other than the fact that I just can't stand the way she talks. I don't think she'd do a lot of harm as the prime minister, but I could be wrong.
I would disagree. I think she would. Okay. She would just continue the same policies, just with a different face. That's where I
but the thing is, the policies you and I know don't come from them directly, right? So the policies are implemented. They implement the policies at the request of somebody else, and I don't think she's that good at implementing policies. That's my thing, but. Anyways, well, what else happened while I was gone?
There's a lot of truckers that know the policies of banks being frozen that would say she's pretty effective at that. But so moving on.
We're running out of time probably, but tell me real quick what happened in the U.S. Anything fun with Donald Trump?
He's been indicted.
Oh God!
And he was arrested.
What?
Yes.
You're kidding me. Like I
it's trumped up charges. It's another one of those, and it's going to be a big embarrassment. Just like all the rest of it. The 2 years, 4 years of Russia. That all turned out to be false, and
the hush money from porn stars, all that. He'll okay, whatever. But he got arrested or not arrested? I guess that's the technical term, or was it just part of being served papers, or what?
It was him turning himself in for the indictment, and then an arraignment and all that. Yeah. So that went down. And something
I'd love
about
to be Trump. You put on your red tie, you get all dressed up, do your hair. Where are you going? I'm going to the county to the courthouse to be arraigned. Okay.
Unfortunately, I've been paying too much attention to Canadian news. I don't know all the details of it. And there's something to do with Hunter Biden and his son. There was information that came out, I guess, about the Burisma stuff that was going on. And it's just a furtherance of that story. But there was one other one that I wanted to get to this week. And it's more of a cultural thing. And it's because of the whole Pride Month and what's going on with that. And I'm not going to get into like what gay people do and all of that stuff. That's none of my business. I don't care. What's been happening is there's been a lot of people upset about what's being taught to children, what's being exposed to children in schools. And there was a big protest that happened in Ottawa on Friday. And there was a big scene, and it was a bunch of yahoos actually on both sides. There was people acting a fool on both sides, including Joel Hardin, who's an NPP with the NDP, who claimed he got punched in the face, but he actually just hit himself with a microphone and got an abrasion, and he feigned being a victim of violence at the protest. But what's most noteworthy about this, and what's been going on with some other protests across Canada and the United States, is that Christians, secular people, and Muslim families are all getting together and uniting over this one single cause of leave the children alone. We want to preserve innocence, and we want to be the ones to tell them about these things about the world, not you, the government and the school system.
And that's fascinating. That's fascinating on two levels. One is I'm not a Muslim, and I find, for instance, the way that Muslims raise their children to be unusual by my standards. But it is your children, and do what you want with your children. So now suddenly we're allies. So I'm guarantee me as a Christian, I'll raise my children different than a Muslim would. But suddenly we're allies. Strong allies, not that we're enemies. We're allies on a front, on an interesting front. Wow. Okay. So
now this is a really interesting turn for demographics when it comes to political voting. Now, Muslims, I looked it up, they're about 4.5% of our population, but a lot of Muslims live in inner cities and could actually affect demographics largely.
I would have thought it would have been higher than 4%, even nationwide. So
now I looked at the I was actually surprised at that number, to be honest.
No, that's great. So if it's 4%, but that could mean, like you said, that in an area like Toronto or Ottawa, or I don't know where they tend to move. I suspect there's a lot in Montreal. There's French Muslims that would live in Montreal from the Morocco and Algeria and places like that. And then
there's Muslims who are just from Canada, like Muslims who've been here for many, many generations. I know I grew up in Windsor, Ontario. I grew up with a lot of people who practice Muslim religion, and there's big communities of Muslim people there that I grew up with. And like you were saying, it doesn't matter when everybody's just practicing the way that they want to celebrate their own religion and culture on their own, and nobody's minding each other's business. This was my life growing up. People were Christian, Muslim. There was other religions. There was Sikh and Hindu and all kinds of in the town that I lived in, and everybody was just fine. These divisions didn't come until later. And what was noted today in an article from I believe this was yesterday, National Post talked about it, about how Muslims were alienated from the Harper government because of, there was a few attacks that happened, and there was an alienation and the liberals really jumped on bringing the Muslims over. And it looks like it may be a family values issue that might shift the vote over in the favor of the Conservatives if there were an election coming up.
Actually, a lot of people who talk about immigrants should, in principle, be conservative. Most immigrants that have come to Canada in the last 20 years are actually probably longer than that, tend to be conservative. They're scared. They misunderstand what conservatives are, and they're scared to vote conservative. They're kind of brainwashed and told to vote liberal. But if they really look at different policies, similar like you're talking about, mm-hmm. I would say that most immigrants fundamentally are conservative. They are people that come from a lot of places that have long traditions and histories and culture and would tend to embrace the conservative mindset. Mm-hmm. So I'm not surprised by this. I'm not surprised. In fact, I think it's a bit overdue. I'm surprised it took this long for somebody to say, whoa, we're sending our kids. I mean, I send my kids to school, man. When it comes to school, actually, I'm very pragmatic about schools. To me, schools, I've always said schools should be teaching things that are hard to learn on your own. So, it's physics, it's math, it's chemistry, it's a little bit of things like that. I don't see a lot of value in a school teaching something like art. Now, I mean, yes, they have to teach it a little bit, but not, when I teach art, I see it as a way to sort of develop some dexterity and some basic concepts of things like that. But other than that, you got a lifetime to do art. You got a lifetime to read books. You got a lifetime to learn about history. So do that on your own time later on and focus in school while you're there on essentials. And I find our schools have gotten too far from those essentials. We're wasting time on really, if we're talking to gender, like that's... Man, you got a lifetime to figure out your gender. You don't need to, make it a big giant part of the curriculum. I was always a bit like that with sports too. I mean, yeah, you need to teach sports in school, but sports, man, you got after hours. So yeah. Anyways, I ramble, but
no, I agree. And getting back on the point of immigrants tending to vote liberal, I think a lot of times what happens is immigrants end up in city centers and they get taken advantage of by a few different things. They get the propaganda of and the priming of conservatives are all racist and xenophobic, and of course they live in other areas. They tend to, so they don't have a chance to see what the viewpoint is of conservatives, perhaps, and then they also are promised things. They're promised things in a time of need. And most people, when they've just come from another country and they have a hard time speaking the language and they're told that, well, we're going to provide you with all these things, you tend to like the guy that's helping you along the way, right? So yeah, you'll be happy to vote for the people. And if they lie to you and they say they'll take these things away from you if you vote for the other guy, people tend to vote with their wallets. They do.
Yeah, and I think we need a lot of immigrants. So we'll have to figure out, hopefully we need a lot of immigrants. And some people say the immigrants are simply brought here as votes. I don't think so. I mean, we need immigrants and they come here for lots of reasons. Mm-hmm. We'll need to make sure they're better educated and vote accordingly. Speaking of votes, Max Bernier, that's this week. Yeah, that's on the 19th.
It hasn't happened yet.
We'll talk about that next week.
There's been some mean back and forths in that whole exchange. But it is what it is. That's how politics work. They're dirty. And
David Johnston quit. That's interesting. Oh, he barely quit. I mean, you said it. He resigned. He did a job. He collected a big paycheck. I'm guessing the PR agency that he hired in the last week said, "Dude, this is a losing battle. You might as well, But what he was harming his reputation. That's what he was doing. And for those guys, we know how important reputation is. It's everything, right? They're some of those guys are at their core, they're a bit narcissistic, and their reputation is everything.
Well,
it should be. It's anybody's. Why would you want to destroy I would never want to destroy my reputation for something as silly as a few bucks. If I had millions, no, I mean, his 200,000 would be like you giving me $500. Would I destroy my reputation for $500?
I don't ever think that that's what it was about. Maybe it was about a family friend and helping him out. I don't ever. Yeah, I don't. I don't think that it was a good appointment. And it was the best thing for him to step down. He just did it way too late to save his reputation, in my opinion. But hey, Marty, thank you so much for joining me for this this weekly update.
Yeah,
and I'm glad
casual night. Casual night. I'll next week we'll do this again, and we'll be really well prepared. I have a feeling next week's going to be a good week. I'm honestly right now. I'm just going to go and I want a beer. I haven't had a beer in like 7 days. I want a beer.
Oh, nice, nice. Okay, so where can everybody find you?
Marty Up North on Twitter and Marty Up North on YouTube. And if you're curious about this adventure, it was Maligne Pass, it's called, and I'll put it up on the YouTube in about a week. Take me a week.
Perfect.
It's what I called embrace the suck. It was beautiful scenery, but those 3 days of pure torrential rain pushes you to a mental limit that's hard to imagine. It's just not fun.
Oh, I've been there. I've worked at an open pit mine back in the day. So
there you go.
I live in the West Coast. Anyway, thanks again for joining me.
Friends.
And we'll have you back next week. Cheers.
Cheers.